Heaven. The story is told that a man spoke with God about heaven and hell. "I'll show you hell," said God. And they went into a room which had a large pot of stew in the middle. The smell was delicious, and around the pot sat people who were famished and desperate. All were holding spoons with very long handles which reached to the pot. But because the handles of the spoon were longer than their arms, it was impossible to get the stew into their mouths. Their suffering was terrible. "Now I will show you heaven." And they went into an identical room. There was a similar pot of stew, and the people had the same identical spoons. But they were well-nourished, talking, and happy. At first, the man did not understand. "It's simple," said God. "You see, they have learned to feed each other." It's been written that heaven is a subject of both wild speculation and heated controversy. The reason for this is that although the word heaven appears in the Bible over 692 times, depending upon the various translations that you're reading from, very few of these actually describe heaven. The word generally has 3 different meanings. So the context and where it appears becomes helpful to know and understand how that particular word is being used at the time. So heaven can mean the skies, that place overhead where the birds fly and the clouds can be seen, such as in Genesis chapter 1, verse 20, it talks about the skies as heaven. Heaven can also refer to the stars and the constellations, what we now would call outer space. Isaiah 13 verse 10 refers to this. And heaven can also refer to God's dwelling place, where the Creator and angels reside. And you see this referred to in many places, 1 Kings and in Matthew. Although mentioned and referred to numerous times, the challenge is that in all the mention of the place where God resides, and where we all hope to be one day, the Bible is short on details and providing a description of what heaven is actually like. That's the case at least until you reach the final book of the Bible, Revelation, where the author writes about a vision, a dream that he's had, and in this multi-layered, multi-dimensional dream, he provides a description of heaven. In chapter 21, he says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The first heaven and the first earth had passed away. There was no more sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem. It was coming down out of heaven from God. It was made ready like a bride is made ready for her husband. I heard a loud voice coming from heaven. It said, 'See, God's home is with people. God will live with them. They will be God's people. God will be with them. God will be their God. God will take away all their tears. There will be no more death or sorrow or crying or pain. All the old things have passed away.' Then the one sitting on the throne said, 'See, I am making all things new. Write, for these words are true and faithful.'" The author goes on to write about the beautiful image that he saw, the new Jerusalem shining as it was filled with God's greatness, shining as a multifaceted, precious gem. It was big as the ancient mind could imagine. "The angel had a stick in hand," he wrote. "It was used to find out how big the city and its gates and the walls were. The angel found out that the city was as wide as it was long, and it was high as it was wide. It was as long as a person could walk in 50 days. It was the same each way. Made of jasper and gold and sapphires and pearls. It was beautiful, like nothing anyone had ever seen. A place without a temple or a church, because this is where God lived. This is where Jesus lived. So there was no need for temples and churches. The new city of Jerusalem came out of heaven, and was heaven, came from God, and where God would reside. Beautiful, stunning imagery. It's believed that Revelations is a book that was written in metaphor to a group of churches surviving at the outer regions of the then known Roman Empire in Asia Minor. They were living under the rule of the Roman government, and to speak of any kingdom or ruler besides Rome and the emperor was treason and would mean death. So this book of Revelations, was meant to inspire the early church and to share a dream, a vision. In the end, it's inspired many who, I remember growing up, had taken this extremely literally with the idea of what heaven would be like. Art inspiring theology. But when we take a look at Jesus' teachings, the reality of heaven is actually very different from this. The Bible does not teach that the earth is merely a temporary home where we await death and a subsequent afterlife in heaven. In fact, if you read the book of Genesis, the concept in Genesis was that while in the Garden of Eden, man and woman and man would live forever. There would be no death. As author Julian Freeman writes in his article, "What did Jesus say about heaven?" For the most part, when Jesus talks about heaven, he's not concerned with what it will be like, but rather how you get yourself in, and the fact that it has begun now. And we are called to live in light of that reality. He goes on to say it's almost like if you were to ask Jesus, "What is heaven like?" Jesus would answer saying, "You're asking the wrong question." He would say, "Don't think about heaven as some ethereal future hope. Ask whether or not you have reason to believe that it's your hope." And then he would add, heaven isn't an ethereal future hope. It's a present reality that begins when you live under my teachings, now, at this time, and you begin to experience my blessings now. We see this in the scripture reading from Matthew that we heard earlier. I wonder if you remember hearing these words not that long ago, because this section comes from Jesus teaching his Sermon on the Mount. He's teaching that our actions are key to being part of God's nation. Not that it's actions alone, but our actions show where our heart is. We can't just give lip service to doing good and then turn our backs and live however we want, however we please. We are called to practice what we preach, not just preach. To be kind and to be loving and to be righteous. Remember, righteous means to be doing that which is right. As John wrote, heaven is a place that has room for all. No one needs to be excluded. There's room for all who follow in God's way. This little story in the book of John has many different layers of meaning to it. Jesus saying that there is room for all. I'm going to prepare a room for you in my heavenly parents' mansion. It's got enough space for everyone. And in a society that was clearly a society of haves and have-nots, of people who saw themselves as the chosen and the rejected, the Jews and the Gentiles, Jesus said there's room for all. Furthermore, for one person to enter into heaven doesn't lead to a scarcity to others. In other words, if you're there, that doesn't take away from the space for me, because there's room for all. We also remember that Jesus was a trained carpenter. So this statement that he was preparing a room for each of us also has an additional layer of understanding that the people would have known as his reputation and knowledge of him had been spread. As Jesus knows each of us, our room will be made for us, customized for us. This isn't really a statement about the way our room in God's mansion is going to be decorated, but it's a statement that we are each known to God and by God. And this home will be a place of intimacy, of caring, and of love. As I had said on Thursday night when we were discussing things in the discussion group, it's not like Jesus said, and we'll be checking into the Motel 6. I am going to prepare a place for you. And to further support this, don't forget the prayer that Jesus taught himself. Our Creator in heaven, your name is holy. May your holy nation come. What you want done, may it be done on earth as it is in heaven. Rather than being focused on all the aspects of what might be, of a future life, may we focus on bringing about heaven on earth right now, where we live right now, so that all may experience God's glory, God's grace, and God's love. May we each say, God, what you want done, may we work, may we endeavor to bring it about on earth now, as you want it done. Truth is, there's much more that's not known about heaven than what is known. But what is known is God's love and presence. May each of us do all that we can to experience this now and in the future, because there's nothing that's stopping us from experiencing God's presence and God's love right now. May each of us do all that we can to experience this. And I want to end by sharing another story with you. A woman who had been diagnosed with a terminal illness had been given 3 months to live. So as she was getting her things in order, she contacted her pastor and had him come to her house. She wanted to discuss certain aspects of her final wishes. She told him which songs she wanted sung at the service, what scriptures she would like read, and what outfit she wanted to be buried in. The woman also requested to be buried with her favorite Bible. Everything was in order and the pastor was preparing to leave when the woman suddenly remembered something very important to her. "There's one more thing," she said excitedly. "What's that?" came the pastor's reply. "This is very important," the woman continued. "I want to be buried with a fork in my right hand." And the pastor stood looking at the woman, not knowing quite what to say. "That surprises you, doesn't it?" the woman asked. "Well, to be honest, I'm puzzled by the request," said the pastor. The woman explained, "In all my years of attending church socials and potluck dinners, I always remember that when the dishes were cleared, someone would inevitably lean over and say, 'Keep your fork.' It was my favorite part because I knew that something better was coming, like velvety chocolate cake or deep dish apple pie, something wonderful and of substance. So I just want people to see me there in that casket with a fork in my hand, and I want them to wonder, what's with the fork? Then I want you to tell them, keep your fork. The best is yet to come." The best is yet to come. Heaven is here with us now. It's here in the way that we relate to one another, that we connect with one another. and that we experience God and share God. And heaven is also in that next step. The best is yet to come. Whether it's tomorrow, time spent with family, by yourself, doing those things you want to do. Share God's love however you can and experience heaven. Amen.
Amen.